And good day, everybody. My name's Kevin McGowan, and welcome to Project 180. Today, we've got something a little bit different, trying something kind of new. We're doing a live interview conversation with a bit of an audience from around the world, which is fantastic. Today, we're going to be speaking with Perry Rath. Say hi, Perry.
Hi, everybody. Hi, folks.
I know it's early for me, but I know it's earlier for you. So I wanted to say thanks again for coming and doing this at 5 a.m. your time. Wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from.
So I'm Perry Rath. I'm originally from Sarnia, Ontario, which is down in southwestern Ontario, and I live in northwestern BC, up around the mountains. Got up early, started my wood stove here. And I am all about art. I been doing art since I was a kid, and now I make my own art, and I also teach people about art and just in general how to think artfully, I guess. So I teach art for 20 years now at the high school here in Smithers, BC, and I've taught workshops to all kinds of ages around my community, but also wherever I've gone in the world too. And so, I've now have a lot of experience with all kinds of people's backgrounds about people who believe that they're oriented towards art and people who don't think they're an artist. And I try to make sure that I find a way for everyone to be able to tap into the creative seed inside them.
And that's exactly where we want to go this morning, right? It's talking about the creative seed, because I know in my own experience, I've always tried to keep a creative mind about, my day-to-day work, anything else that I happen to be managing, but it's hard as you get an adult sometimes, right? You kind of get a habit maybe of not using your best creative mind to figure, problems at work or in your life. I'm curious, why do you think that happens? Like, how does creativity kind of start to vanish or become maybe more regimented as an adult?
Yeah, there's a documented study, and I can't remember the person who did it, but it was basically gauging levels of brilliance and different metrics of of geniusness, I guess you could say, of lateral thinking, and basically followed a group of people from when they were very young children, like 3 or something, to when they were 30, and found that people's ability and their confidence in their ability to be creative plummets quite dramatically. I mean, we all think of artwork or weird little things that kids do as being just brilliant. Like there's that famous Picasso quote that he spent his life learning how to draw like a child again.
Right.
And it's that whole idea where you're young and you're not really infected or influenced by society and by what expectations of what it means to be a responsible human, let's say, or something like that. And you're just free to explore and create and play. And those are the key aspects of what we have as children, and then it erodes over time for sure. We get inundated with ways that we're supposed to be or ways that we're supposed to think, and we lose that. And I see that amongst my high school kids, like even amongst grade 8, 9, 10. By then, everyone's used to being told what to do by then. In many ways, our school system is set up to train kids on how to follow directions on what to do, and there's a certain aspect about that everyone needs to know how to follow that. But I find that when you break out of that, that's when the eureka moments come. That's when you can really, as I said before, tap into that creative seed inside you. Is like when you learn how to think for yourself, learn how to apply different ways of doing things, you'll come up with brilliant new ideas. And if we can continue to hack away at that box we put ourselves into as adults, then we'll be able to access that again.
Well, and I know we've spoken about this before. Actually, we've recorded another conversation about just this, but there are some really great ways to try and and cut through, I guess, some of that regimented mind that we've evolved. And even like you said, like obviously there's situations in your adult work life where things have to be regimented. You know, you're working on like project management stuff is what we talk about here. But like if you're in the military or if you're, you know, doing a construction project, there are certain things you have to do a certain way.
Yeah.
And maybe creativity isn't the focus, or like, you know, there's not a lot of room in there, but there's still some. Right? So how do you like, what's a good way to start kind of reminding yourself that you have these skills? Because I'm sure they're still there, they're just maybe buried, right? What's a good way of trying to kind of get these things out again?
Well, it's a lot like any other kind of exercising program for yourself. Like you just have to accept the fact that, well, understand that you are creative, and just like you would schedule a time into your day to go to the gym or work out or go for a jog or meditate or any other thing that you love to do, practice your guitar. You just have to make time for it, and you'll tap into it in ways that might be surprising for you. So it's just sort of, as you said at the very beginning, like we get out of the habit of being creative, we get out of the habit of play, and if you incorporate that into your day, then it becomes, it generates a little bit more momentum for yourself, and then you do make it a habit. So, for instance, if you just at the beginning of the day, or at the end of the day, or in the middle of the day, you found a time that kind of worked for your work day or your family day or whatever your daily life is like, carving out even 15 minutes of some kind of, sometimes even this, the easiest way to start is just doodling. Many times, you know, those of us who old enough to remember being anchored by a telephone, talking to someone and doodling on the pad that's nearby the phone. Doodling is an amazing way that to tap into your intuition and just non-judgmentally make these designs, these patterns, these things that are somehow a reflection of your mind, or reflection of your conversation, reflection of what we're thinking about lately.
Mm-hmm.
So even just doodling is I always find that's a great entry point for people. And I mean, I myself have a ton of different exercises that I provide to my students of all ages. But whenever they feel stuck, whenever they feel like I don't know what to do, I can't think of anything to do, it's just like these little portals of ways to open up that that aspect. And you know, I can show a couple of, I can talk about a few of them here if you want. But essentially, in the work environment, like since this is the focus of today, we really want people really want employees that not only, as we talked about, like need to be able to follow certain directions and follow steps to get somewhere, but everyone wants innovative thinkers as well. Everyone wants to figure out how to encourage their employees to not only feel more relaxed at work and more focused at work, but also to be able to think outside the box of what of you know, so you're not getting the standard problem-solving procedures for the challenges that we face at work for the project management teams or that kind of thing. So providing even just a 15-minute session for your employees or your team members where you're just in a relaxed state, able to tap into your intuition in a non-judgmental way. And that's how you can get these two different directions with art making or results, I guess. Is one is you're looking for that eureka moment, right? That aha moment. And the other is you can cultivate those moments more and more by creating this habit, by creating that pattern of just allowing yourself to doodle. So even if it seems non-productive at first, it comes back to you. Essentially I call it the creative investment. What value do you put on investing in creativity for your team, and how are you going to cultivate that? Yeah,
that's really interesting. I like the way you phrase that in terms of an investment. It's certainly business speak to some degree, right? But it's true. Like I think back in my own working career, and I started off at a giant, you know, when I got out of university, giant telecommunications company. Okay, I was writing technical documentation for telecom switches. Can you imagine a more difficult job for like a creative mind? So I kind of had to like, well, every inch of it was regimented, right? All the designs, everything, like all the processes were regimented. You had to follow the process. But now, almost 30 years later, the whole industry is one of disruption. It's constant disruption, right? And yes, there's still some physical, manufacturing industries like that one, and that maybe has not changed as much. But many other industries have evolved and just appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Your Airbnbs, your Ubers, your Google, your Facebook, all that stuff has come seemingly out of nowhere because someone just had a really creative idea, but then was able to back it up with, obviously the business sense and the marketing, which is also creative, and, and developing those communities. So it seems to me that this whole, the structured system or systematic way of doing a lot of things, this is antiquated at this point in the workplace, because you never know when the next thing is going to show up and your business is now gone because someone came up with a creative, better idea that is now serving your client base.
Yeah, you have to be adaptable, really. Like, especially our world it's amazing how much we. I mean, the word pivot was used so much, especially through the pandemic and stuff. You've got to learn how to pivot and shift to all these influences and changes in society that are coming at us, and that's what I tell my teen students as well. Is like, we don't know what world you're entering now. Like, you can't train for a specific job and guarantee that you're going to have it. You need to be able to really diversify and apply, and that's why I think apply creative thinking to whatever comes your way, because that's the way you're going to solve these challenges, and that's the way you're going to get out of it. So that's the value of an arts education, and that's what I tell my students. That's what my board of education knows. That's why it's important to keep a good arts education in schools, and that's why it's good to continue your arts education when you leave high school, when you're an adult. It's like going for a walk. It's just something that humans do. It's not necessarily, some people are born with more of an artistic talent, let's say, than others.
Yeah.
But everyone has that creative impulse, whether it's an art or whether it's the way you plate your dinner when you make your food, or the way you organize your shelves at home or something like that. Your creative mind is thinking spatially, it's thinking aesthetically, it's thinking like, how am I going to organize this to make it work for me? And the way you're going to organize it is going to be different than someone else, and that individuality is what's going to also break you out of that box.
Okay, let me ask you something else that just kind of occurred to me in terms of advocating for this kind of thing. Because I know we've all probably bumped into people or have that friend or that colleague who will, arts for kids, or arts, just a waste of time. You'll hear that from various folks. But then they also turn around like they're big fans of the Marvel movies or of a particular, band, whether, whoever it might be. Like they are a fan of the arts, but they seem to have this block somewhere of understanding that what they're actually engaging in is an artistic expression, and they're enjoying that. So,
Nice.
So how do you, like, in terms of advocating maybe for, like you're suggesting, having your team engage in more creative thinking, start doodling, start doing maybe some exercises, set some time aside for this kind of activity. Like, how can you advocate for that kind of time spent with a boss or management team or whomever who might not just get it, who just like,
yeah. Again, I mean, that comes back to the idea of when you're thinking about how to run a business, how to run a team, and especially if you're not the high rank person, like if you're not the boss, and it's like, how do you bring that into a business system, into a workplace? There is lots of research out there that can back you up, for sure. Just Googling it Googling creativity at work or Google creativity in business, and you'll see lots of scientific studies as well about how right down to the level of neurotransmitters, how it's going to start sparking and making connections for neurotransmitters, but also just I think I encourage sort of this understanding. I know in business we think about things like pillars, like what are the things in a company or a business that support it and that drive it. And I always think we need to do a creativity health check for your organization. And it's like, how do you inspire people to come to work every day and to do their best? And if that's important to you, then I think, again, how are you going to invest in making sure, like, I know it all comes down to the checks and balances of the ledger at the end of the day. And it's like, how much money or value do you put on employee creativity and employee workplaces can be stressful. Art is another way. If you have like an exercise program or something like that for your employees, why not have a creativity exercise program as well? Like, think of some of the big companies around, Google and that kind of thing. They do have these rooms, like they've made these amazing rooms and things for people to just chill out, you could say, and you get into a different state of mind, and then different ideas flow. And I know that it's stressful for people who are crunching numbers, like, what am I going to get back from this? Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily easy to measure. There's definitely a qualitative aspect about it that makes it sometimes hard to quantify, especially at first when you're just building that momentum, building that creative culture in your organization. But eventually it does pay off, and you start to see employees that love to come to work, that are inspired to do things that aren't just the mundane aspects of do step 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of thing. And I do have a quick thing I can show you about, because sometimes people might be like, well, is it just all about doodling? Do I just doodle random stuff and all that? It can start there, but I know from teaching kids, people like to have some kind of starting point, right? So I've got so many exercises that I do with students and adults alike. And one of the ones that I think would be very applicable for the business world is one that I call Map Your Day. So think of it like a cartoon, like you're making your own comic strip, let's say, of your day, your work day. And how's that? You can do it in advance of your work day, as if like, this is what I want my work day to look like. Or you can do it in reflection of like, okay, how did this day go? Like at the end of the day, you're like mapping your day about like, so here's just an example that I drew of a day of mine that I just tried to recall a specific day of mine. And I was like, okay, how did that feel to go through my work day, And again, this is where art is outside of the language of having to speak about it all the time. Some of these marks may mean nothing to you, and some of them I'm not even sure what they mean to me, but that's the beauty of visual art, is that it is its own language. You don't have to always explain everything that you do, and that's what frees you into making these breakthroughs. So this is like a typical, this was a certain day in my mind, and you can see I've just drawn different boxes and shapes, and I've just organized this piece of paper spatially. And that's another way that sort of gets you into that different frame of mind, is like, how are you going to organize something that makes sense to you? And then how are you going to communicate that to others? So how I would recommend this day is like, let's say you're running a team, and you're like, hey, I saw this presentation about creativity, and I think I want to incorporate that into my team. Let's just start mapping out just as I said, like, think of it like you're making a little comic strip of your day. What is it that was important to you in that day? What were your good moments? What were your times of frustration? Where did you meet challenges? Where did you rise against those challenges? Where did you relax? Where did you feel more at ease? Where did you feel like you were in flow? Like, that's another thing that I think is important about accessing creativity, is it helps you access these flow states, which when you get into that zone, you know it, and it feels good, and it feels like things are just coming at you and you're just trying to catch them as fast as you can, kind of thing.
Everything just starts clicking, right? Like it.
Yeah.
What I like about this, and I think we've got about a minute to go, Perry, but I just want to say, like, what I really like about the what you just shared, that it's nonverbal. I was thinking while you're describing it, like, some people just need to talk about their day, right? Your spouse, your friend, whomever, they come home, oh, my day was this and that. They need to verbalize it to get that out.
Yeah.
And then they feel a little better after. But that exercise for somebody who maybe isn't so verbally inclined or isn't comfortable sharing, or just that's not their personality, that's maybe a really good alternative, just to try and get maybe some of that frustration from the day out. It's just whatever it ends up looking like. That's a genius idea that I hadn't thought of before. So I'm really grateful to you for sharing that. I think that's something I will actually use going forward.
Yeah.
Thought of that.
Sure. Great. Yeah. Happy to hear that. Yeah.
I know we should we'll maybe wrap up the formal Q&A part of the session now. I know there's a few other people on the call. I want to give anyone else an opportunity to ask Perry a question. If you do, please click the raise hand button if you'd like, and we can go from there. Otherwise, I'll give that a couple seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Kristen has asked or wants to ask a question. Go ahead and unmute and go ahead. We can't hear you, Kristen. I know you unmuted, but I can't hear you.
Yeah.
If you want to just type in the chat, you can do that too. If your mic's not quite working. Okay, we'll give it one more shot. Anybody else on the call would like to? Oh, David has a question. Feel free.
Hi there. Yeah. Really interesting stuff. And so I work in the field of design, and I make use of a lot of visualization of, it might be like kind of like what Perry did with his day, but like what's called like a journey map, or you can do process maps. And all the same stuff comes up though, the blockages. People don't know how to do it. I'm not a drawer, all these kind of things. But it's not so much a question, but I guess just an endorsement comment of what Perry was recommending, that releasing that and getting started, new things come about. You go from text to visual and you see something new. Or as you were talking about, Kevin, like someone might want to talk about their day, but when you do the visual version, you see something that you didn't even know was there often. And it's like, oh, I didn't realize that this always happens to me every day. I'm down at this point, or I'm high at this point. And there's stuff that's in your head that you're not always conscious of. And I think that visual communication space, which is actually some of the research I've seen, is, more than half the population is visual thinkers, but we've also got this baggage of drawings for kids. That's not professional. Don't use that. But when I bring that in, usually the message can be so condensed in a visual, it's incredible compared to words. And also what the insights you get from it are often very powerful. So yeah, just a total thumbs up to everything that's been suggested. So.
Well, that's great. Thanks, David. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's great way of stating all that stuff. So it's great that you're also use that in your capacity to whatever degree you can in your work.
Well, and I've had to go through some of these growing pains, or learning to draw like a kid again. I'm definitely not a visual artist like Perry. I do some photography, but even this stuff at work. And one thing I did for myself that I would maybe recommend to people to play, like Perry mentioned, the doodling. I use something called a boogie board. It's like a digital whiteboard, but it's disposable. It's it's not Wi-Fi or anything. It's just a whiteboard, and you start your idea there. You're like, is this a Venn relationship? Is this a sequence relationship? And you put down some ideas, and it can be rough and ugly, and you're going to throw it away. And a prototype is a big thing that we play with in the design spaces, to start with something, look at it, try it again. And that as soon as if you start drawing on a computer, there's this perfection aspect that really wants you to get it right and not throw it away, versus have a notebook or a boogie board that's just like, this is for sure a draft that will be thrown away. Start there.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. That whole perfection aspect is something, we need to throw away for sure. Like, but it's a process-based thing, and you're just there to make a mess and see where it goes. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go. Oh, Kristen just put text in, so I'll read it out for her. Apologies for the tech issue. I work in the public sector, which tend to be a little bit lagging in terms of innovation for business practices. Wondering if Perry has any suggestions for how governments can adopt and senior leaders can buy into these types of creative culture while being more under the microscope of taxpayers and ensuring fiscal responsibility. That's a good question.
Yeah. That's the whole domain of economic return, right? Like, as a visual artist myself as well, who I know I have friends, right, who apply for Canada Council Art grants and that kind of thing. And whenever someone gets a grant to do something that's a kind of bizarre, right? Like, there's a huge public outcry about, like, we're funding what? We're putting our money towards what? I'm paying my taxes to make that weird thing. And so it's going to be a cultural shift for sure, and I've seen it. I've seen it happening, but it's incremental for sure. And even within the education system, I know that change is glacial sometimes. It takes a long time for something to catch on and something to be like start to shift. And I've seen that happen, as I said, in the world of Ministry of Education, with the idea of formative assessment or things like that. So when you're under that kind of scrutiny, I don't know if I have like the right answer of like the dart to the heart about what's going to make that happen, other than figuring out, again, the value. Like, obviously you're not going to have a huge budget, let's say, for creativity, right? But I think if it's incorporated in there, like you think of like a lot of especially the public sector, you've got a benefit package, right? So there's things that people value in terms of like, okay, it's probably good to have a massage every so often. It's probably good to do have a therapist or a counselor you talk to every so often. So why not include, as a small portion of the budget to begin with, something that has to do with this setting aside time and resources, like whether that's buying lots of reams of paper or markers or that kind of thing, or some of these digital products that David was talking about, and of course there's other there's so many digital things now that you can do the doodling online. Although I'm definitely an advocate for the actual pen and paper. Like, there's something different about that, especially if you're on a screen all day, just to be able to doodle with like that. Like, there's something about that mobility of your body that is just different with how that processes your mind and eye and hand coordination kind of thing.
Agreed.
But I think something along those lines is a way to sort of start to shift the importance of creativity in the public sector. That's a small sliver. It'll end up just being a small sliver of the budget. If it was a huge thing, then there'd be definitely a public outcry about it. But a little bit of that, and I think, again, it's hard to measure what return you'll get on it, but it does come back in value for sure.
Well, I would suggest that there are ways to measure. Like, if you're doing something, and maybe Kristen, if it was you pitched it like a pilot, right? Your team is going to try this out. It's going to cost us basically nothing. We need to get maybe an instructor to come in for an hour. There's a couple $100. There's some pens and materials like that. But if you can start gathering some data, even in terms of semi-formalized, but you can survey kind of pre and post how people are feeling about their environment, how people are feeling about their workload, how people, just general employee satisfaction stuff. And you might be able to see after some time that this would have a positive impact on people's satisfaction in the workplace. And, maybe things have become more productive. Maybe there's other ways to measure it too, but there's probably a way of starting it. Again, like Perry's saying, super small sliver of budget, but a real opportunity maybe to incrementally alter the culture a little bit by just trying this and then showing that there's some evidence. Yeah, this is actually helping our team, and build from there. David, I saw you had your hand up too. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This is my first event with you guys, but really perfect topic for me, at least.
Perfect.
So, things on Kristen's comment. The how I'll get to in a second, but I think another part of my work, I do a lot in evaluation, and I think that this idea in government, in some ways, it's hard to sell. Because we look at a lot of outputs and we don't really look at impacts, and we don't do that deep level evaluation. And I think that this kind of stuff, it's going to show in the quality and the real end product and the impact state. And I think there's a lot of work in government in that we need to do more meaningful evaluation. So I think that's one part of the puzzle, because if you just say, we want to make outputs and we want to make whatever, so many a week or so many a month, this stuff's going to be very easy to push aside.
Yeah.
Is what we're making worthwhile and making a difference and really hitting the objectives? That's another thing. And then this is where the lateral thinking and stuff can really help add more deeper value. So, and then, for $100, boy, you can have enough markers and toys to have a lot of creativity for a year for a team. And one activity I've done, and I don't know, people in this space are familiar with, but there's an activity called How to Make Toast. And you ask people to process map how to make toast. And you let them do it by themselves, and then they show it. And it is insane. You see those barriers, I can't draw, all that. But also, you got 10 people in the room, and there's 10 different ways to make toast, and you're like, how could that be? This is so simple. So obvious, but we conceptualize and see things really differently. And that I use as a starter to get into then process mapping. And that's 45 minutes maybe. So
it's interesting. And I think when it's a whole other subject maybe of conversation for another time, but I want to plant maybe a seed, is when you are actually merging these ideas with the creative world and the project management world, right? We're all project manager type people on this call, but when you're managing a creative project, when you're working on a film, when you're working on some kind of collaborative thing or event, maybe it's a school dance, whatever, a play, that like there's so much that has to happen and all these creative minds come into play. How do you manage to coordinate that, which is a whole other environment rather than maybe the corporate, structure environment, but there's still structures that need to be considered. But also, I would say that in my experience, and I'm not trying to paint anybody with, a particular brush, but my experience is like the corporate world, a lot more, number crunchers, button pushers who just want to follow the process, but more in the creative world, that's when it gets a little out of control in terms of trying to get all these creative minds to focus and deliver a thing, right? How do you bridge that gap too when you're working on something that's maybe just by its own nature more, air quotes, creative kind of project?
Yeah, definitely. That's and that just shows the importance of having a diverse kinds of people on your team. Like, if you got people who are really great with numbers and organization and all that, they'll help keep the creative minds sort of on track to some degree, I guess.
Yeah.
and then vice versa, the creative minds will show up in different ways for the corporate organizational kind of people. Like, we need this, and then you start to see the momentum start to happen, and that's when that synergy happens, when that kind of collaboration really really meshes, and that's when it's really exciting as a team, for any kind of project. I mean, whether it's a minor project or a major project. Yeah.
Well, it comes down to the goal, I guess, right? If everybody's online have the same objective, the same end product, whatever that might be, it certainly helps in terms of communication, making that happen. But sorry, I don't want to talk over David. Go ahead.
Sorry. Hope I'm not taking up too much time.
Not at all. This is great.
No. Yeah.
Boy, so many thoughts on this. So one thing that I've tapped into is like the improv space, improv rules, and there's this concept of yes and exactly what the examples that you were talking about. There's a big difference between someone's the director of whatever this school performance and they have a very rigid idea of exactly what they want, and they want to tell everyone, I want the scene done this way, I want the costumes done this way, I want the music done this way, versus you're in charge of the music. I'm really happy to I look forward to what you're going to bring us. You're in charge of the costumes. I look forward to what you're going to bring us. And it's a yes and not trying to control everything. And it's a collaborative, co-creative space. And it's a very different way of working. And I think that's the tension that we have a lot in the workplaces, is that people have been socialized to a kind of command and control, and as a decider, and orders come down, versus, yeah, we have a common objective. We need 3 different parts done. Go at it, bring it back, and let's put it all together, and being more flexible and creating that space for contribution and individuality, and rather than trying to control things. In the improv, they have an expression. They say, "Bring a brick, not a cathedral." So the cathedral is the complete finished idea, versus, I think we can start here in the left corner. What's next? And then we do it together. And it's a radically different way of working. I like it, but it is perceived as a bit loosey-goosey. And you don't know for sure what the end piece is, or what the end product is going to be exactly. We do a lot of data-informed work, so that, to me, that makes sense. But so there's a lot of things around our culture of changing how we work to allow the creativity to come in. So I'll stop there.
That's great, David. Thanks. I
Yeah.
just want to see if anybody else, we've got about 5-10 minutes left, see if anybody else had questions or comments they wanted to throw in. I know there's a few of us on the call who maybe haven't spoken up yet. I want to make sure they have the opportunity. Katie from Texas, I believe. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. I had a question about, we mentioned, or David mentioned, perfectionism earlier, and how that can be kind of a barrier to implementing or starting to tap into that more creative side. So I was just curious about Perry's thoughts about how you can maybe overcome those feelings of perfectionism.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're so critical of ourselves, right? And that will stop us in our tracks. We won't want to continue anything if it's not like perfect. And I mean, carrying on with the analogy that David had of like the brick and the cathedral, like you're not going to show up in your mind. In your mind, you've visualized this perfect cathedral, right? And you don't know necessarily what it's going to look like. So you are literally going brick by brick, and so it's a bit of faith and trust for sure. And getting to the point of trying to understand that it is a process, and things are not going to always turn out the way you want to in your head, or the way that you might visualize or you might want to see happen. And so I guess it's the perfectionism idea within a team and then within yourself. And how are you going to obviously if we think of like inner circles, like obviously ourself is the first one, and then there's the other circles of who we're working with, kind of. But yeah, I see so many students, for instance, in my classes, who are so hesitant to move forward because of that perfectionist thing. And yeah, that can be so hard to overcome. But eventually you get to this point of like, oh, screw it, I'm just gonna just do this little thing and see what happens. It's just sort of, it's actually quite a breakthrough moment when you actually can free yourself from those shackles of perfectionism. And it is not easy, I know. It's a matter of giving yourself the grace that it can be messy, it can be unknown, it can be there can be uncertainty involved in whatever you're doing. Whether it is just a little drawing of your cat, or whether it is like this big project that you're trying to manage. It's a matter of giving yourself grace and really finding the way to get into your intuitive mode, like trusting your intuition and understanding that it's not going to be complete in a day. It's not going to look brilliant and beautiful, that it is a bumpy ride to get there. Being an artist is not blissful. Like there's times when you're in that flow zone, as I mentioned earlier, and there's times when you're just frustrated and you're banging your head against the wall because it's not coming out the way you want it to be. But it is a shift that when it happens with some of your effort and some of your forgiveness for yourself, that you do get there. But I don't know, Kevin, David, anyone else want to chime in on that too?
It's a tough one, like the whole perfectionist thing. I wouldn't say I'm a perfectionist. I think I probably was, and I think you're right. That stopped me from maybe trying a lot of different things or trying different routes on projects and things, because I don't know for sure that's going to work. I want to stick to the tried and true that I already know. It's almost like a trauma response, right? You know, something went wrong at some point, so you want to make sure you're not doing that again. You want to make it sure it's perfect all the time. But yeah, I think it takes a lot of work to kind of get past that. But like anything else, if you have the goal and the support, you can certainly work through that. If you're working on a team, a collaborative environment as well, you know, I forget who said it to me originally, but you know, we were working on something that was very complicated and lots of eyeballs on it from very important people, right? And eventually we had to say, look, we can't have perfection. We're looking for excellence. Excellence, not perfection. And because everybody's idea of perfection is so different. In the software world where I've lived a lot of my career, perfection doesn't exist unless you're at NASA and like it's 100% bug-free software because there's lives on the line and billions of dollars. Like that's a different thing. If the bold button doesn't work on your word processor today, yeah, it's annoying, but it's not life and death, right? So there's wide spectrum of things where perfectionism is important, but excellence is always acceptable, right? So I think if you can kind of pivot your thinking that way, it certainly is helpful. Yeah, David, go ahead.
I'll weigh in because nobody else is jumping in, but yeah, I think like Perry touched on it, to me, there's the culture of this perfectionism idea, but the self dialogue or self treatment of perfection, that's the biggest barrier I find, and it takes time to get to work through and get over. But giving yourself grace, I love that phrase, and I think the big thing is, I mentioned the word like iterations and working iteratively, saying this is the first draft I'm showing you. It's meant to be bad, and taking that bold step to show that rough work, that not only for yourself releases you, and you label it as this is rough. It's not meant to be perfect, and it shows it to other people, and you're then giving them grace to show that rough work, and also being willing. There's I get into a lecture, but yeah, there's the more time we spend preparing something, if I do a quick doodle note and take it to my boss in a half an hour versus I sit at my desk, I work on it for 3 days and then take it, I'm going to be really married to that pitch, that proposal. And if they say, I think you missed the mark here, David, I'm going to feel like crap. If I go in with a half an hour draft and they say, I think you missed the mark, David, this is crap, I'm like, okay, I'll go under version 2.
Yeah, the investment isn't so much.
Go ahead, Kevin.
No. See, I interrupted. Sorry, but it was just like the investment of the time isn't so much, and it makes the decisions a lot easier to accept.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is once you can kind of get yourself over that hump, the beauty of they add their 2 cents to it, and then somebody else adds their 2 cents, and you're like, this moved ahead in a couple of hours more than I could have done in a week on my own. This is worthwhile doing. And I think when people get that learning experience happening, then they can start to do that iterative work more regularly. But it's that first time is going to be scary and hard and uncomfortable. And that's the way it is. But yeah.
I like how you start talking about iterative. I can never say that word, iterative. In project management space, it's all about agile development, and that's one of the very foci of agile development is iterating. And you start with that little piece. Is this where we're going? Yes. Move on to the next piece. Is this still where we're going? No. Let's go back, and then you pivot, you move on. So it's interesting to hear these themes come up from maybe non-traditional software, whatever worlds where that's become somewhat of a norm, but that the same wisdom is applied elsewhere, because it's very critical for the success of anything, because generally somebody has requested, we need to get product X done by 6 months from now, but they don't necessarily know exactly what it is they want. They think they do, right? So you start a little piece, creative thinking, lots of communication, and you kind of end up getting to the point that they needed to be, not necessarily the point they thought they wanted to be. So that is a nice way to tie it in as well. I want to say thank you so much to Perry for getting up so early again, for having this conversation. This was awesome. I really appreciate all your advice and your wisdom on this. Well, Perry, I'll say again, thank you so much. Go back to bed maybe for an hour before you have to get up and go to school. To anybody else in another time zone, I hope you all have a great day. We'll sign off there, but thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.